"You're not getting in with that jacket, man. This isn't a thrift store." They laughed when the single dad reached for the velvet rope line. The bouncer sneered at his old jacket and turned him away like he was dirt. But the dad didn't argue. He just glanced at the curb, calm as steel. Because seconds later, a black SUV rolled up behind him like a silent verdict. And suddenly, the man they mocked was the only one who could act. This isn't about a jacket. It's about how dignity survives disrespect. Before I show you the exact moment when the SUV door opened and the VIP's son collapsed on the pavement. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Brent Holloway stood squarely between Elias Navarro and the entrance to Cormac's executive lounge, arms folded across a chest that filled the doorway like a wall, and the rope gleamed under the soft gold lights. Beyond it, laughter spilled from crystal and marble. Elias didn't raise his voice. He didn't step back either. "I'm not here to party," he said quietly. "I left something inside." Brent looked him up and down again. Boots worn at the edges, jeans faded from work. That old leather jacket creased at the elbows like it had seen too many winters. "Yeah," Brent muttered, smirking. "Dignity?" A couple waiting nearby chuckled. A valet pretended not to hear. Elias felt the heat rise in his chest, but it never reached his face. He'd learned a long time ago that anger wastes oxygen. His gaze drifted past Brent's shoulder into the polished interior, toward the hallway that led to the private lounge. Somewhere inside was the small canvas pouch he'd dropped earlier, while fixing a faulty light fixture near the bar. Inside that pouch was something his daughter needed tonight. Across the curb, his sedan idled under the dim streetlight. In the passenger seat, Lila Navarro leaned forward, chin resting on her hands against the dashboard, watching everything. He could see her reflection in the windshield. Confused, not embarrassed yet. Too young to recognize humiliation. Old enough to remember how it felt. Brent shifted closer. "You're blocking my line, buddy. Move along." "I will," Elias replied evenly, "after I get what's mine." The music inside thumped, bass vibrating faintly through the sidewalk. A gust of cold air cut between buildings, lifting the collar of his jacket. It smelled like exhaust and expensive cologne. Brent's tone sharpened. "You maintenance guys don't get to just wander back in. Rules are rules." Maintenance guys. The words didn't sting because they were wrong. They stung because of how they were used. Elias had fixed the building's emergency lighting system 3 nights ago when a power surge knocked out half the floor. He'd crawled through service ducts while executives sipped imported whiskey upstairs. No one laughed then. Now the rope was the line between labor and luxury. He stepped aside just enough so Brent could feel he'd won a small victory. Then Elias turned, walked toward his car, and opened the passenger door. Lila looked up at him. "Did they find it?" "Not yet," he said gently, "but they will." She studied his face, searching for cracks. "That man's mean." He smiled faintly. "Some people talk loud when they don't know what they're looking at." Behind them, headlights swept across the pavement. A low, sleek black SUV rolled to a stop directly behind Elias's sedan, its tinted windows reflecting the club's golden glow. The engine purred instead of roared, controlled, expensive. Valets straightened instantly. Brent adjusted his posture, shoulders tightening, smirk disappearing as if erased. The rear door of the SUV opened. Victor Cormac stepped out first. Tailored coat, silver hair precise, presence like gravity. Conversations near the rope quieted. Brent moved fast now, voice respectful. "Mr. Cormac, good evening." Elias closed the car door softly but didn't move away. Something about the stillness inside that vehicle caught his attention. No movement from the second passenger, while Victor turned back toward the open door. "Ethan?" he called. There was no answer. A pause, then a soft, uneven thud. Elias's eyes sharpened before anyone else understood what they were seeing. The teenage boy inside the SUV slumped sideways, half falling against the seatbelt, one hand twitching weakly before going still. Victor's voice cracked. "Ethan?" Brent froze, uncertain whether to rush forward or wait for instruction. The street noise dulled, like the air had thickened. Elias was already moving. Elias reached the SUV just as Victor Cormack grabbed his son's shoulders. "Ethan, stay with me. Ethan!" The boy's head lolled forward, breath shallow and uneven, skin already losing color under the streetlights. Brent hovered uselessly near the curb, eyes darting between Victor and the gathering crowd. "Call 911, Brent barked, finally remembering his authority. "They're calling," someone shouted back. Elias leaned into the vehicle, voice steady. "Sir, I need space." Victor looked up, confused. He recognized the jacket. The same man Brent had dismissed minutes earlier. "I've got him," Elias continued, already assessing. "How long was he like this?" I don't know. He was fine in the car." The teen's pulse fluttered erratically beneath Elias's fingertips. Too fast. Wrong rhythm. His breathing hitched, then stalled for half a second too long. Adrenaline sharpened everything. The distant bass from the club, the scent of gasoline, the metallic taste in his own mouth. "Brent," Elias said without looking up, voice firm but controlled. "Clear the area. I need air." Brent hesitated. "Now," Elias added. Something in his tone cut through the confusion. Brent moved. Victor stepped back, hands trembling. "Who are you?" "Right now?" Elias replied, easing the boy flat across the seat. "I'm the one helping him." He loosened the seatbelt, checked airway, tilted the chin carefully. Ethan's chest barely rose. A murmur rippled through the small crowd forming near the velvet rope. Phones were out. Whispers spread fast. "VIP's son, something's wrong, someone fainted." Lila watched from inside her father's sedan, eyes wide. Elias pressed 2 fingers to the boy's neck again, pulse weakening. He shifted position smoothly, movements economical. "Sir, did he complain about chest pain, dizziness?" Victor shook his head helplessly. "He said he felt hot, that's all. Heat, collapse, rapid pulse." Elias's mind ran through possibilities with clinical precision. "Ambulance is on the way," Brent called, a voice tighter than before. "That's good," Elias answered calmly. "But he doesn't have that kind of time." He slid partially into the SUV, bracing his knee against the seat, and began measured chest compressions when Ethan's breathing faltered completely. Each push was exact, depth, rhythm, count. Nothing rushed, nothing wasted. Victor stared. You're a doctor?" Elias didn't answer immediately. He focused on the rhythm under his hands, the silent count in his head. 30 compressions. Pause. Airway again. A faint gasp escaped Ethan's lips. Weak, but there. "There we go," Elias murmured, more to the boy than anyone else. The crowd shifted tone. What had started as curiosity was becoming something else. Awe. Fear. Recognition that this wasn't random chaos. Brent stood at the perimeter, trying to manage onlookers, but his earlier confidence had drained away. Every time he glanced toward Elias, the memory of mocking him seemed to echo louder. A valet leaned toward another staff member. "He's not guessing," the valet whispered. "He knows exactly what he's doing." Victor dropped to one knee beside the open door. "Please, don't let him." "I won't." Elias said firmly. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance now. He adjusted Ethan's position, checked responsiveness again. A tremor ran through the boy's fingers. Breath returned in shallow pulls. "Stay with me, Ethan," Elias instructed quietly. "Just breathe." The teen's eyelids flickered. Relief cracked across Victor's face, but fear still clung to it. What happened to him? Could be cardiac, could be heat stroke, could be something else entirely, Elias replied. Paramedics need to run diagnostics. My job is keeping him stable until they're here. Victor searched his face again, this time not with suspicion, but with desperate trust. Brent stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We should wait for professionals." Elias shot him a look that stopped him mid-sentence. Not angry, just certain. "He needs action," Elias said evenly, "not optics." That landed harder than a shout. The sirens grew louder, red and blue lights flashing at the end of the street. Inside the sedan, Lila whispered to herself, "That's my dad." The valet, who'd heard Brent's earlier insult, swallowed hard. If you're seeing what I'm seeing right now, if you've ever watched someone underestimated rise when it mattered most, subscribe. Because stories like this don't just entertain. They reveal who people really are. The ambulance screeched to a halt beside the SUV. 2 paramedics jumped out, equipment in hand. "What have we got?" one demanded. Elias didn't step back immediately. He gave a concise report: symptoms, timing, pulse irregularities, response to compressions, clear and clinical. The paramedic paused mid-motion and looked at him differently. "Were you medical?" she asked. "Once," he replied simply. They transferred Ethan to the stretcher, hooking up monitors as they moved. The machine beeped erratically before stabilizing slightly. Victor rose slowly, eyes never leaving his son. Then he turned toward Elias. "You saved him." Elias shook his head once. "I bought him time." The stretcher rolled toward the ambulance. Brent stood frozen near the velvet rope, the weight of the crowd's silence pressing down on him. And as the ambulance doors slammed shut, at the street that had witnessed mockery only minutes earlier now held something far heavier. Respect. The SUV's engine ticked softly as it cooled. Elias wiped his hands on a cloth from his pocket, breath steadying. Victor stepped closer, voice low. "I owe you." Elias glanced toward his car. "I didn't do it for you," he said quietly. And the rope that had separated him from the inside world suddenly looked very small. The ambulance lights continued flashing against the glass facade of the lounge, red and blue strobes turning polished marble into something harsh and exposed. Elias stepped back from the SUV as paramedics secured Ethan inside. The rear doors shut with a heavy metallic thud that seemed to echo longer than it should have. Victor stood motionless for a second, then straightened his coat like a man trying to pull control back over a night that had slipped from his hands. "I'm riding with him," he said quickly, already moving toward the passenger side of the ambulance. One of the paramedics nodded. "You can sit up front." Before climbing in, Victor turned, his eyes locked onto Elias, not as a stranger in a worn jacket, not as a maintenance worker, but as the only steady point in the chaos that had just unfolded. "I'll find you," Victor said. Not a threat, a promise. Elias gave a small nod. "Focus on your son." The ambulance pulled away, sirens rising again as it merged into traffic. Silence followed. The bass from inside the lounge resumed faintly, awkward and misplaced, like the building didn't know whether it was allowed to continue celebrating. Brent shifted his weight near the rope. Guests were staring at him now, not with admiration, but with something closer to judgment. A woman who had laughed earlier folded her arms and avoided his eyes. He cleared his throat. All right, everyone. Situation's handled. Let's keep things moving. No one moved immediately. Elias felt their gazes settle on him instead. He could sense the change without looking. The same people who had smirked now seemed uncertain how to stand. He turned toward his sedan. Lila was already opening the door before he reached it. "Dad!" She rushed around the hood and wrapped her arms around his waist. "Is he okay?" "He's alive," Elias said softly, kneeling to her level. "That's what matters right now. You fixed him." "I helped him," he corrected gently. "Other people will finish the job." She pulled back, studying him the way only children do, without ego, without politics. "Why didn't you tell them you know?" He smiled faintly. "Tell them what?" "That you used to save people." He brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "Because saving someone isn't about announcing who you are. It's about showing up when it counts." Behind them, Brent exhaled sharply, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the crowd's attention. He walked toward Elias, posture stiff. "Look," Brent began, lowering his voice. "You did good back there." Elias stood slowly, placing himself subtly between Brent and his daughter. "He's a kid," he replied. "That's all that mattered." Brent nodded once, then glanced around. "Mr. Cormac's not going to like this kind of scene." Elias raised an eyebrow. The scene wasn't the problem. Brent's jaw tightened. A valet stepped closer, hesitant. "Sir, that was impressive, the way you knew what to do." Elias shrugged lightly. "Training." "What kind of training?" the valet pressed, curiosity overcoming caution. Before Elias could answer, Brent cut in. "Doesn't matter, ambulance took over." But it did matter. Everyone could feel it. The crowd began dispersing slowly, murmuring to each other. Words floated in fragments. Doctor? Military? How did he know? Elias opened his car door for Lila and helped her inside. As he reached across to fasten her seatbelt, she whispered, "That man was scared." "He was," Elias agreed. "Like you weren't." He paused at that. Fear had been there. It always was. It just didn't get to drive. "I was scared," he said quietly. "I just didn't let it decide what to do." She nodded solemnly, absorbing that lesson. When he closed the passenger door, he noticed Brent still standing there, watching. The rope hung loose between polished posts. No one waited behind it now. Brent stepped forward again, pride battling something heavier. "You said you left something inside." Elias met his gaze evenly. "I did." Brent hesitated. The power dynamic that had existed 20 minutes ago felt distant now. Fragile. "Oh, check for it," Brent muttered. "You don't have to," Elias replied. "I'll wait." Their eyes held for a second longer. Brent looked away first. He turned and disappeared through the glass doors, shoulders not quite as broad as before. Elias leaned lightly against his car, the cool metal grounding him. The street smelled faintly of burnt rubber from the ambulance's abrupt stop. Somewhere above, a loose banner flapped softly in the night breeze. Lila rolled down the window slightly. "Are we going home?" "In a minute." Across the building's mirrored exterior, Elias caught his own reflection. The old leather jacket, the worn boots. The man who had chosen to step away from operating rooms and decorated halls for something smaller, quieter. He didn't regret it. Inside the lounge, figures moved hurriedly. Word would be spreading fast. Brent reappeared after a moment, holding a small canvas pouch between two fingers. He walked back toward the curb slowly. "You dropped this near the bar," he said, extending it. Elias took it carefully, fingers brushing the familiar fabric. "Thanks." Brent hesitated again. I didn't know. You didn't ask, Elias replied calmly. The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. Brent looked down at the pavement, the earlier smirk nowhere to be found. The velvet rope swayed slightly in the night air. And for the first time since the evening began, Brent wasn't the one controlling who stood on which side of it. He shifted his stance, hands clasped loosely in front of him instead of folded across his chest. The posture change was small, but visible. Guests drifting back toward the entrance noticed it too. Elias turned the canvas pouch over in his hands. The fabric was scuffed, the zipper slightly worn. He exhaled quietly, relief settling into his shoulders in a way no applause ever could. Lila leaned halfway out the passenger window. Is that it? He nodded. Yeah, that's it. Brent cleared his throat. What is it? Elias looked at him for a long second, measuring the question. There was no sarcasm in Brent's voice now, just curiosity and something like discomfort. It's hers, Elias said simply. Brent frowned. Your daughter's? No, he shook his head once. Her mom's. The words changed the air between them. Inside the pouch was a small silver locket and a folded hospital bracelet, items he carried more often than he admitted. Tonight he'd taken them out earlier while adjusting wiring near the lounge's private corridor. Lila had been struggling to sleep lately. The locket, when placed under her pillow, somehow steadied her dreams. Brent looked toward the car, where Lila was watching openly. The scene no longer felt like an argument at a club entrance. It felt personal. I didn't mean... Brent began, then stopped. Elias didn't rescue him from the sentence. He just zipped the pouch and slipped it carefully inside his jacket. The bass from inside the lounge faltered again as the glass doors opened. A manager hurried out, whispering something urgent to Brent. The name Cormac carried weight in every syllable. Brent nodded stiffly, then glanced back at Elias. Mr. Cormac's assistant wants your name, Brent said. For the hospital. He didn't say it with arrogance this time. He said it like a man delivering instructions he didn't fully understand. Elias's jaw tightened slightly. For the hospital, he repeated. In case they need details, you gave the paramedics information. There it was, recognition creeping in. He hesitated, not because he feared being known, but because he'd built a life around not needing recognition, around staying in the background where power never looked. Elias, he said finally, that's enough. The manager stepped closer. Last name? He glanced at Lila again. She gave him a small nod, as if telling him it was okay. Navarro. The manager typed it quickly into her phone. A few of the earlier onlookers lingered nearby, pretending to check rides or messages while clearly listening. Word was spreading through the crowd in hushed fragments. He stabilized him. He knew what he was doing. That guy? The maintenance guy? Brent rubbed the back of his neck. You military or something? The question wasn't mocking. It was searching. Elias studied him. Something. Brent huffed softly. Figures. A breeze rolled down the street, carrying the scent of rain, though the sky was still clear. Traffic resumed its normal rhythm, as if the crisis had already been absorbed into the city's bloodstream. From inside the lounge, laughter tried to restart. It sounded thinner now. You can go in, Brent said abruptly. Elias blinked. What? For a drink, on the house, or whatever you came for. Brent gestured awkwardly toward the entrance. No rope. Elias looked at the velvet line swaying gently under the lights, a symbol that had felt impenetrable less than an hour ago. I'm not here for a drink, he said evenly. You were earlier. I was here to work. Brent swallowed. And I'm here now because my daughter needed something, Elias continued. That's it. Brent nodded once, slow. The shift in tone between them was undeniable. The same man who had mocked the jacket now stood in the shadow of it. A car horn sounded down the block. Lila leaned out again. "Dad?" "Coming," he called softly. He opened the driver's door but paused before getting in. "Brent," he said without turning fully around. "Yeah? You're good at keeping order." Brent straightened slightly, unsure where this was going. "But order isn't the same thing as judgment," Elias added. The words landed heavy but calm, like instructions, not insults. Brent didn't respond immediately. He just watched as Elias settled into the driver's seat. The engine hummed to life. Through the windshield, Elias saw Brent still standing there, posture uncertain, eyes no longer sharp with superiority. Something had cracked. Not shattered, but shifted. As Elias pulled away from the curb, the lounge lights reflected across his windshield in gold streaks. In the rearview mirror, the black SUV was gone. The velvet rope still hung in place, but it no longer seemed like a barrier. Beside him, Lila held the pouch in her lap. "You didn't tell them everything," she said quietly. "No." "Why not?" He glanced at her, then back to the road. "Because tonight wasn't about who I used to be." She traced the edge of the locket through the fabric. "It was about who you are." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. Ahead, the streetlight turned green. Behind them, inside the glowing building, conversations were already rewriting what had happened. And somewhere between the curb and the hospital, a powerful man was beginning to ask questions about the quiet single dad in the old jacket who had stepped forward when everyone else froze. Elias hadn't made it more than half a block when his phone vibrated in the cup holder. The screen lit up with an unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail. Lila glanced at him. "Answer it." He exhaled and tapped the screen. "This is Elias." "Mr. Navarro?" A woman's voice, steady, professional. "This is Marlene Kessler, mister. I'm Cormac's executive assistant. I'm calling from the hospital." He slowed at the next intersection, pulling to the side of the road. The city noise hummed around them. "Yes?" "Ethan is in the ER. The paramedics relayed your intervention. The attending physician has questions about the timeline and his symptoms before collapse. Mr. Cormac is requesting you come." Elias closed his eyes briefly. Hospital still had a smell in his memory. Antiseptic, fluorescent lights, the echo of monitors. "I gave the paramedics everything they need," he replied carefully. "They said you performed compressions before they arrived," Marlene continued, "and that your report was detailed." A pause. "We'd appreciate your presence." Lila watched him, silent. He could drive home. Place the pouch under her pillow. Pretend the night had ended at the rope. But he knew better. Cardiac irregularities in teenagers weren't random. Sometimes they were genetic, sometimes structural, sometimes misunderstood. "I'll come," he said finally. "Thank you. I'll inform security." The call ended. Lila's voice was soft. "Are we going back?" "To the hospital." She nodded once. No complaint. As he turned the car around, the city lights seemed harsher now, sharper against the windshield. If you've ever seen someone try to bury their past only for it to rise when it matters most, subscribe, because some stories don't stay quiet forever. The emergency entrance of St. Aldrich Medical Center glowed white against the dark sky. Ambulances idled. Automatic doors hissed open and closed with mechanical precision. Elias parked near the curb and stepped out. The air carried that sterile scent he remembered too well. Inside, the waiting area buzzed with low conversations and the occasional cry of a child. Victor stood near the double doors leading to trauma rooms, phone pressed to his ear, voice tight. When he saw Elias, he ended the call immediately. "You came. I said I would." Victor stepped forward, extending his hand, then hesitated, unsure whether the gesture fit the moment. Elias shook it anyway. "The doctors say his heart rhythm was unstable before collapse," Victor said quickly. "They're running tests. They asked what you saw. I saw a rapid pulse, shallow breathing, then loss of responsiveness." Elias replied evenly. He responded to compressions. "That's good." Victor studied him again, more intently this time. "You weren't guessing?" "No," a nurse approached. "Mr. Cormack? Now the attending physician would like to speak with the gentleman who assisted." Victor gestured. "That's him." They walked through the swinging doors together. The hallway lights were bright, unforgiving. Machines beeped steadily from behind curtained bays. The sounds pulled at something deep in Elias's chest, a muscle memory he'd tried to retire. In Trauma Room 3, a young cardiologist stood reviewing a monitor. "You're Mr. Navarro?" she asked without looking up. "Yes." She turned. Her eyes flicked to the jacket, then back to his face. "The paramedics said you initiated CPR within seconds." "I did. What's your background?" There it was again. Elias didn't hesitate this time. "Army trauma surgeon, 15 years. The cardiologist blinked once. Surprise, then immediate recalibration. "That explains the compression depth," she murmured. "Oh, you likely prevented neurological damage." Victor's breath caught. "But his arrhythmia concerns me," she continued. "Did you notice anything else?" "Heat complaint before collapse," Elias replied. "Possible underlying condition triggered by exertion." She nodded slowly. "We're checking for hypertrophic cardiomyopathy." Victor looked between them. "What does that mean?" "It means," Elias said calmly, "your son may have had something no one caught yet. Tonight didn't cause it, it revealed it." The cardiologist gave him a measured look. "Would you be willing to review his intake notes with me? Another set of experienced eyes doesn't hurt." Victor stared at Elias, something close to disbelief in his expression. The man Brent had mocked at a velvet rope was now being consulted inside a trauma bay. Elias glanced toward the waiting room in his mind, toward Lila sitting alone with the pouch in her lap. "I can spare a few minutes," he said. As he stepped closer to the monitor, the old rhythm returned. Analysis, pattern recognition, decisive calm. Not ego, not nostalgia, purpose. And outside those hospital walls, the story of the single dad in the old jacket was already spreading back toward the lounge, toward Brent, toward every witness who had left too soon. Inside Trauma Room 3, the cardiologist scrolled through Ethan's vitals while Elias stood beside her, eyes fixed on the monitor. The steady beep of the heart monitor wasn't fully steady yet. There were subtle spikes, brief rebellions in the rhythm that most people wouldn't notice. He noticed. "Zoom that segment," he said quietly, pointing. She adjusted the display, and the irregularity became clearer. "There," he added. "That dip before the spike, it's compensating." The cardiologist nodded slowly. "You've seen this before." "More than once." Victor stood a few feet back, hands clasped tightly together. The confidence he carried at the club, the tailored authority, the effortless command, was gone. Here, he was just a father. "Is he going to be okay?" Victor asked. The cardiologist answered carefully. "He's stable right now. We're preparing imaging. If this is structural, we'll know soon." Elias folded his arms, the leather of his jacket creasing softly. "He collapsed after exertion?" Victor nodded. "Basketball practice. then the drive. Any family history of sudden cardiac events? Victor hesitated. My brother, 23. They said it was a fluke. Elias exchanged a look with the doctor. Not a dramatic one, just understanding. Not always a fluke, Elias said gently. A nurse entered with a tablet. We need consent for imaging. Victor signed without reading. The cardiologist turned back to Elias. You said 15 years? Yes. Why'd you leave? The question wasn't accusatory, just curious. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes stayed on Ethan, who lay pale, but breathing steadily. My wife died, he said finally. Car accident. My daughter was 6. The room quieted in a different way. I could save strangers, he continued, voice level. But I couldn't save her. After that, priorities shift. The cardiologist's expression softened. I'm sorry. He nodded once. So was I. A transport team arrived to wheel Ethan toward imaging. Victor followed, then paused. Stay, he said to Elias. It wasn't a command this time. It was hope. I will, Elias replied. As the gurney rolled out, the cardiologist lingered. You understand, she said quietly, that what you did tonight wasn't just first aid. You stabilized a ventricular rhythm under pressure. Most civilians wouldn't know where to begin. I'm not most civilians, he answered. She almost smiled. Clearly. In the hallway, staff members were already whispering. Word had traveled from paramedics to triage to attending physicians. The maintenance worker, the jacket, the rope. Reputation moves differently inside hospitals. It doesn't care about clothes, it cares about outcomes. Elias stepped into the corridor, the bright lights reflecting off polished floors. Down the hall, he spotted Lila sitting in a plastic chair, legs swinging slightly, the canvas pouch clutched in her hands. He walked to her. Are you okay? He asked. She nodded. They have good snacks here. He smiled faintly. That's important. She looked up at him. Are you going to fix him all the way? He crouched beside her. That's not how it works. I help, then other people help. That's how it's supposed to work. She seemed to consider that. Across the waiting area, a television mounted on the wall played muted news. A ticker scrolled beneath images of the city skyline. Elias noticed Brent's name flash briefly in a social media caption on someone's phone nearby. Security chief at Cormac Lounge involved in medical emergency. The narrative was forming. Victor approached again, slower this time. The imaging will take 20 minutes, he said. His voice had steadied, but gratitude weighed heavily beneath it. Yet the doctor said your timing made the difference. Elias shook his head. His heart made the difference. It responded. Victor studied him. You don't take credit easily. Credit doesn't keep someone alive. A long silence stretched between them. I need to ask you something, Victor said finally. Why were you at the club tonight? Work, Elias replied. Maintenance contract. Victor frowned slightly. You're not practicing anymore? No. Because of your daughter? Yes. Victor nodded slowly, absorbing that. In that moment, the imbalance between them shifted again. Not dramatically, not loudly, but undeniably. The man who owned the building stood in a hospital corridor asking quiet questions of the man who fixed its wiring. From inside the imaging room, a technician called out instructions. Machines hummed, and the future was being scanned in grayscale. Victor turned toward the sound, then back to Elias. I misjudged you, he said. Elias didn't answer right away. It happens, he said at last. But both of them knew the misjudgment hadn't started with Victor. It had started at the rope, with laughter, with a jacket. And when the imaging doors finally slid open again, the outcome wouldn't just determine Ethan's condition. It would determine what happened next. For all of them. The technician stepped out first, wheeling the machine back into place. Behind her, the cardiologist approached with a tablet in hand, expression composed but intent. Victor straightened immediately. Well? There's thickening along the left ventricular wall, she said carefully. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It explains the arrhythmia. Victor's shoulders sagged, not from devastation, but from confirmation. Is it treatable? It's manageable, she replied. Medication, monitoring. Possibly a minor procedure depending on follow-up tests. The important thing is it was caught. Her gaze shifted briefly toward Elias. Caught tonight, she added. Victor closed his eyes for a second, absorbing that truth. If Ethan had collapsed alone, if compressions hadn't started immediately, if seconds had stretched into minutes. He opened them again and looked at Elias differently now, not with curiosity, not even just gratitude, with something heavier. You said this might not have been a fluke, Victor murmured. It rarely is, Elias answered quietly, but now you know. Ethan was rolled back toward recovery, color returning faintly to his cheeks. He was conscious, groggy, confused, but alive. Victor stepped forward and squeezed his son's hand. You scared me. Ethan managed a weak smile. Sorry. You don't apologize for that, Victor said, voice cracking slightly. Elias stepped back, giving them space. The cardiologist lingered near him. Your assessment in the SUV likely prevented a worse episode. Reduced oxygen time makes all the difference. He nodded once. I'm glad it worked. It did more than work, she replied. It bought his brain time. Victor turned back toward Elias. Walk with me. They moved down the corridor, away from the noise of recovery, and into a quieter consultation area lined with glass windows overlooking the city. Victor leaned against the counter, suddenly looking older than he had outside the lounge. I built that place from nothing, he said. The club, at the towers, everything. Elias remained silent. I thought control meant strength, Victor continued. Security, image, keeping certain standards. He paused. And tonight, control didn't mean anything. Elias folded his arms loosely. Control's useful, until it isn't. Victor gave a faint, humorless laugh. Brent told me what happened before I arrived. Elias didn't react. He said he made a mistake. That's his to own. Victor studied him carefully. You could make this very public. Elias's brow furrowed slightly. Why would I? Victor gestured toward the skyline. You were humiliated. In front of witnesses, in front of your daughter. The word daughter carried weight. Elias looked through the glass at the city lights below. She saw something more important, he said quietly. What's that? That when someone needs help, you don't check their resume first. Victor absorbed that. Still, Victor said after a moment, what happened at the rope was unacceptable. Elias met his gaze. Then fix it. No accusation, no demand, just a statement. Victor nodded slowly. I intend to. Across the hall, Lila stepped out of her chair and walked toward them, the canvas pouch tucked under her arm. Dad, she called softly. He turned immediately. Yeah? The nurse said he's going to be okay. He crouched slightly so they were eye level. That's good. She glanced at Victor, then back at her father. He was really scared. Victor swallowed hard. Yes, Elias said gently. He was. Lila stepped closer and slipped her hand into her father's. You weren't. He gave her a small smile. That's not true. Victor watched the exchange in silence. The dynamic was unmistakable now. The rope had separated class. The hospital corridor had erased it. Victor straightened, decision settling into his posture. "When Ethan's discharged," he said carefully, "I'd like you both to come by the lounge, as my guests." Lila's eyes flicked to her father. Elias didn't answer immediately. He wasn't tempted by luxury. He wasn't interested in spectacle. But he understood something else was at play. Witnesses, public memory, narrative correction. "We'll see," he said evenly. Victor nodded once. "I'll have my assistant coordinate." The cardiologist approached again. "He's asking for you," she said to Victor. Victor glanced at Elias. "I owe you more than thanks." "You owe him presents," Elias replied, nodding toward the recovery room. Victor understood. As he walked away, Elias felt the subtle shift solidify. The man who had commanded velvet ropes now moved with a different kind of gravity, one shaped by vulnerability. Lila tugged lightly at his sleeve. "Are we going home now?" "Yeah," he said softly. "Now we are." They walked toward the exit together. Behind them, in a private office down the hall, Victor was already instructing his assistant to schedule a meeting, not with investors, with his security chief. Elias and Lila had just reached the hospital's sliding exit doors when his phone vibrated again. The city air outside felt cooler now, quieter, as if the night itself had exhaled. He checked the screen. Marlene Kessler. He answered. "Yes, Mr. Navarro," she said, voice measured but firm. "Mr. Cormack would like you to return to the lounge tomorrow evening. 7 o'clock, he insists." Elias glanced at Lila, who was watching him closely. "And for what?" he asked. "A formal acknowledgement," Marlene replied, "and a conversation." He could hear the unspoken layer beneath her words, not private, not discreet, public. "I'm not interested in a spotlight," he said evenly. "It won't be a spectacle," she assured him. "It will be corrective. Corrective." He understood what that meant. Witnesses had seen him mocked. Witnesses had seen him act. Now witnesses would see something else. "I'll consider it," he said. "Mr. Cormack hopes you'll attend. So do I." The call ended. Lila tilted her head. "Are we going back there?" "Maybe." She wrinkled her nose. "To the rope place?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah, the rope place." She was quiet for a moment as they walked toward the car. "Are they going to say sorry?" He opened her door and helped her inside. "That's up to them." As he closed it, he noticed a news alert flashing across a bystander's phone nearby. "Private lounge incident. Teen hospitalized. Quick action by unidentified bystander, unidentified. That suited him just fine. If you believe the truth deserves daylight, subscribe. Because what happens next won't stay behind a velvet rope." The next evening arrived colder than the last. A thin drizzle coated the pavement outside Cormack's executive lounge, reflecting gold light in fractured patterns. Elias stood across the street with Lila, hands in his jacket pockets. The same jacket. He could have worn something else. Something newer, something less symbolic. He didn't. "You don't look nervous," Lila observed. "I'm not." She squinted at him. "A little?" He chuckled softly. "Maybe a little." Across the street, the velvet rope was already in place. Guests gathered under umbrellas, murmuring. Brent stood at his post, but his posture was different. Less rigid, less theatrical. A black sedan pulled up, and Marlene stepped out first, scanning the sidewalk until her eyes found Elias. She crossed quickly. "Mr. Navarro." "Just Elias." She offered a brief nod to Lila. "You must be Lila." Lila gave a polite wave. "Mr. Cormack is inside," Marlene said. "He's asked for you to enter through the front." Elias glanced at the rope. "That's new," he said quietly. Marlene didn't smile, but there was understanding in her eyes. "Yes, it is." They crossed the street together. Conversations near the entrance softened as people recognized him. Whispers moved through the line like wind through leaves. "That's him. The jacket guy, the one from the SUV." Brent saw them approaching. For a split second, instinct flickered across his face, the old reflex of control. Then it faded. He stepped forward, unclipped the velvet rope, and held it open. "Good evening," he said. No sarcasm, no smirk, just 2 words. Elias met his gaze evenly. "Evenin'." Lila squeezed his hand tighter as they stepped past the rope together. Inside, the lounge was quieter than usual, not empty, but attentive. Word had spread, not just about the collapse, about what happened before it. Victor stood near the bar, speaking with 2 board members. When he saw Elias enter, he ended the conversation mid-sentence. He walked directly toward him. "Thank you for coming," Victor said. "I didn't come for applause," Elias replied. "I know." Victor turned slightly, addressing the small gathering that had begun to form. "Last night," he began, voice carrying without effort, "my son's life was placed in the hands of a man standing outside this very door." The room stilled completely. A man some of you saw turned away. Eyes shifted, some lowered. Victor continued. He acted without hesitation, without ego, and without regard for how he'd been treated minutes earlier. Brent stood a few feet away, jaw tight but steady. Victor stepped aside slightly, gesturing toward Elias. "This is the man who saved my son's life." A murmur moved through the room. Heavier this time. Not gossip. Recognition. Elias felt Lila's small hand in his. He didn't step forward. He didn't bow his head. He just stood, because this wasn't about entering the lounge. It was about redefining who belonged in it. The silence stretched for a breath longer than comfort allowed. Crystal glasses hovered midair. Conversations died unfinished. Every pair of eyes in the room rested on the man in the worn leather jacket standing just past the velvet rope. Victor didn't rush the moment. "His name," Victor continued evenly, "is Elias. Not Dr. Navarro. Not former army surgeon, just Elias." Marlene stepped slightly to the side, holding a tablet. The cardiologist from the hospital stood near the back of the lounge, invited quietly, present deliberately. This wasn't gossip. This was verification. Victor glanced toward her. "Doctor?" She inclined her head. The immediate CPR and stabilization prevented oxygen deprivation. That's not opinion. That's measurable fact. A visible shift rippled through the guests. Measured fact. Elias felt the weight of it, but he didn't let it alter his posture. Lila leaned lightly against him, small but steady. Victor's voice lowered slightly, although it still carried. "Before I arrived last night, Elias was denied entry." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Victor didn't soften it. He was mocked. The word landed harder. Brent stepped forward on his own this time. "I was wrong," he said. The room turned toward him. "I judged based on appearance," Brent continued, voice tight but controlled. "I let my position make assumptions. That won't happen again." He didn't look at the floor. He looked directly at Elias. The apology wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. Elias studied him for a long second. Then he nodded once. "Learn from it." That was all. No speech, no victory lap. But the simplicity of it struck deeper than anger would have. Victor turned back to the room. This establishment prides itself on exclusivity, he said. But exclusivity without discernment becomes arrogance. He let that hang. My son is alive because a man we almost dismissed chose integrity over pride. A woman near the bar swallowed visibly. Victor gestured toward the velvet rope behind them. That rope is meant to manage capacity, not measure worth. Slowly, deliberately, he reached back and unhooked it from its post. The red cord fell slack between polished stanchions. Gasps murmured softly through the lounge. Victor handed the rope to Brent. "We'll find a better system," he said quietly. Brent took it without protest. Lila looked up at her father. "Is it broken now?" He leaned down slightly. "No, it's just not in charge." A faint ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, relieved, humbled. Victor stepped closer to Elias again, lowering his voice so only those nearest could hear. "You could have walked away," he said. "I thought about it," Elias admitted. Victor nodded. "Why didn't you?" Elias glanced at Lila. She was watching. Understanding crossed Victor's face. Across the room, Marlene quietly instructed staff to open the secondary doors leading to the terrace. Guests began moving more freely now, the atmosphere lighter but altered. Conversations restarted, but differently. People approached Elias in small groups, not to flatter, to thank. "I'm sorry for laughing," one man said awkwardly. Elias met his gaze calmly. "Then don't next time." The man nodded quickly. The cardiologist stepped forward briefly. "You ever consider returning to practice?" she asked quietly. He smiled faintly. "Every day. And? My daughter's childhood isn't replaceable." She respected that. "And if you've ever seen power shift without shouting, subscribe. Because dignity doesn't need volume to win." Brent approached again, this time with 2 glasses of water. "For you," he said, handing one to Elias, "and for her." Lila accepted hers proudly. "Thank you," she said. Brent's expression softened. "You're welcome." The shift in him wasn't theatrical, it was structural. Something had recalibrated. Victor raised his glass lightly, not in celebration but acknowledgement. "To discernment," he said. A few guests echoed it quietly. Elias didn't lift his drink high, he simply held it. He wasn't here to become part of their circle. He was here to remind them it wasn't the only one. Through the open terrace doors, the city stretched out, bright, layered, indifferent. Victor leaned closer one final time. "There's a position on my foundation's medical board," he said. "Advisory only, flexible, no politics." Elias considered it. Not for status, not for repayment, for impact. "I'll think about it," he replied. Victor nodded, satisfied with that. Across the room, the velvet rope now lay coiled discreetly behind the bar. No longer a barrier, just a piece of fabric. The red velvet rope lay coiled behind the bar like something retired, stripped of authority. Conversations inside the lounge had regained their rhythm, but the tone had shifted permanently. Laughter was softer now. Glances were longer. Elias stood near the terrace doors, the cool night air drifting in around him. Lila leaned against the railing, peering at the city lights below as if they belonged to everyone. Brent approached again, slower this time, hands empty. "I meant what I said," he began. Elias didn't turn immediately. "About learning?" "Yeah," he nodded slightly. "Good." Brent exhaled, then continued. "I built my reputation on control. Who gets in, who doesn't. I thought that was the job." "It is," Elias replied evenly. "Just not the whole job." Brent absorbed that. "You saw something I didn't," Brent said quietly. "I saw a kid in trouble." "No," Brent shook his head once. You saw beyond what was in front of you. Elias finally turned toward him. You can too. The words weren't condescending. They were matter of fact. Brent straightened slightly. Victor's restructuring security protocols, training, bias workshops. I'm leading it. That's a start. A silence settled between them, not hostile, just reflective. Across the lounge, Victor was speaking with the cardiologist and 2 board members. The foundation position he'd mentioned wasn't an empty gesture. Papers were already being drafted, opportunities forming. Marlene approached Elias with quiet efficiency. Mr. Cormack wanted me to clarify, no pressure regarding the advisory role, but your insight tonight changed more than one life. I didn't come for a career shift, he said calmly. I know, she replied. That's why it matters. Lila tugged lightly at his sleeve. Dad. He crouched to her level. Yeah? Are we famous now? He smiled faintly. No. Good, she said firmly. I don't want cameras. He laughed softly. Neither do I. Victor joined them again, expression thoughtful. I've been thinking, he said, about what you told me at the hospital. Which part? Control isn't strength. Elias nodded slightly. Victor glanced around the lounge, the guests, the staff, the open doors. Strength is discernment and humility. He extended his hand once more, not for thanks this time. For partnership. Elias looked at it briefly, then shook it. I'll review the foundation proposal, he said. But on one condition. Victor raised an eyebrow. Name it. Scholarships, Elias replied. For kids with undiagnosed cardiac risks. Screening programs in public schools. Victor didn't hesitate. Done. The simplicity of that exchange carried more weight than any speech. If you believe change should follow revelation, subscribe, because this isn't where the ripple ends. Brent returned from the bar and placed a small folded card in Elias's hand. At my number, he said, if you ever need access. Elias glanced at it, then slipped it into his jacket pocket. Access works both ways, he said. Brent understood. The cardiologist approached once more. Ethan will be discharged in a few days. He asked about you. I'll visit, Elias replied. You should, she said. Music resumed gently in the background, not loud, not overpowering, just present. Victor stepped onto the terrace with them. The skyline stretched wide and brilliant. You know, Victor said quietly, last night I thought the black SUV meant I had arrived. Elias followed his gaze outward. Arrived where? Victor smiled faintly. Exactly. Below them, traffic flowed without hierarchy. No velvet ropes, no reserved lanes. Lila leaned against her father's side. Can we go home now? He looked down at her. Yeah. Victor nodded respectfully. Thank you for everything. Elias inclined his head once. As they walked back toward the entrance, guests parted naturally, not out of status but respect. Brent opened the door without being asked. Good night, he said. Night, Elias replied. Outside, the drizzle had stopped. The pavement still shimmered under streetlights. He opened the car door for Lila, then paused before getting in himself. He glanced once more at the lounge. The rope wasn't visible from here anymore. Just the doorway, and a security chief standing differently than he had the night before. Elias slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. As they pulled away, the building receded in the rearview mirror, not as a fortress of exclusion, but as a place quietly recalibrated. Beside him, Lila yawned softly. You did good, she murmured sleepily. He smiled to himself. I did what needed doing. The city lights stretched ahead. No ropes, no barriers, just road. 3 days later, Elias stood in a hospital corridor again, this time without urgency pressing against his ribs. Lila walked beside him, holding a small paper bag with a neatly wrapped card inside. Room 412. He knocked once before stepping in. Ethan sat propped against pillows. Color returned to his face, a heart monitor clipped discreetly to his finger. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and apple juice. Victor stood near the window, turning as they entered. "You came," Ethan said, voice still a little thin but steady. "I said I would," Elias replied. Lila stepped forward shyly and placed the paper bag on the bedside table. "It's just cookies," she said, "but they're good." Ethan grinned. "Thanks." Victor watched the exchange with quiet gratitude. "The procedure went well," Victor said. "Medication, monitoring, lifestyle changes. He'll be fine." Elias nodded once. "That's good." Ethan studied him carefully. "Dad told me what happened outside the club." Elias glanced briefly at Victor. "He told me I wouldn't be here if you'd walked away," Ethan continued. "Why didn't you?" The question hung in the air. Elias pulled a chair closer and sat down. "Because someone needed help." "That's it?" Ethan asked. "That's enough." Victor let out a slow breath. "There's something else," Victor said. He stepped toward the small table near the window and picked up a folder. "The Foundation Board approved the cardiac screening initiative this morning," he said. "We're funding pilot programs in 3 districts, public schools." Lila's eyes widened slightly. Victor extended the folder toward Elias. "And the advisory seat is yours if you want it. Minimal meetings, maximum impact." Elias took the folder, but didn't open it yet. "You moved fast," he said. Victor's expression grew thoughtful. "My son's collapse wasn't the first warning I ignored in life. It will be the last." Silence settled in the room, not heavy, but reflective. Brent appeared briefly at the doorway, having waited respectfully outside. He knocked lightly against the frame. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to interrupt." Victor gestured him in. Brent stepped inside, noticeably less imposing in the hospital setting. He nodded toward Ethan. "Good to see you up." "Thanks," Ethan replied. Brent turned toward Elias. "I wanted to say, I've started implementing the new training protocols, staff evaluations, scenario drills, bias assessments." Elias met his gaze calmly. "Good." Brent shifted slightly. "I also removed the rope entirely. We redesigned the entry flow." Victor added, "Reservations are verified digitally now. No visual filtering." Elias allowed himself a small nod. "That matters," he said. Ethan looked between the adults. "What rope?" Lila answered before anyone else could. "It used to decide who got in." Ethan frowned. "That's dumb." A faint smile crossed Elias's face. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It was." Victor cleared his throat. "There's something else." He stepped closer to Elias, lowering his voice slightly, though everyone could still hear. "I'd like you to speak at the Foundation Gala next month," he said. "Not about me. Not about the club. About discernment. About what happened." Elias leaned back in his chair slightly. "I'm not a keynote speaker," he replied. "You're something better," Victor said. "You're proof." Lila looked up at her father. "You could tell them about not checking resumes first." Brent let out a small breath of agreement. Elias considered it. He hadn't wanted attention. He still didn't. But attention directed correctly could redirect something larger than ego. "I'll think about it," he said again. Victor nodded, satisfied. If you've ever seen someone refuse applause but accept responsibility, subscribe, because the real victory isn't loud. Ethan shifted slightly in his bed. "Can I ask one more thing?" "Sure," Elias said. "Are you going to come back to being a doctor?" The question was innocent, direct. Elias looked at Layla first. She met his eyes steadily. "You don't have to," she said softly. "Just don't disappear." His chest tightened briefly at that. "I'm not disappearing," he said. He turned back to Ethan. "I might not go back to the exact life I had," he continued, "but I'm not done helping." Victor exhaled slowly, as if something had settled into place. Outside the window, afternoon light filtered across the city, less dramatic than neon, more honest. Brent stepped back toward the doorway. "I'll let you all talk." He paused before leaving. "And thank you. Again." Elias inclined his head once. As Brent exited, Victor extended his hand once more, not as a businessman, not as a benefactor, as a father. Elias shook it firmly. In that simple gesture there was no rope, no velvet, no hierarchy. Just two men who understood something they hadn't fully grasped before. Discernment. And the cost of getting it wrong. A week later, Elias stood at the edge of the school gymnasium as folding chairs filled slowly with parents and teenagers. A banner stretched across the far wall. Free Cardiac Screening Initiative, sponsored by the Cormack Foundation. Layla sat in the front row, legs swinging lightly, watching the setup with quiet pride. Victor adjusted the microphone at center court. No tailored spotlight this time. Just fluorescent lights and polished wood floors. Brent stood near the entrance, not guarding, just guiding families toward registration tables. No velvet rope. Just open doors. Victor stepped to the microphone. "A week ago, my son collapsed outside my own establishment. He's alive because someone chose action over pride." He gestured toward Elias, who stood reluctantly near the sideline. "I misjudged what strength looked like," Victor continued, "and I nearly let arrogance define who deserved to stand at my door." The gym was silent. Elias stepped forward when Victor nodded to him. He didn't take the center stage immediately. He looked at the rows of students instead, some bored, some curious, some unaware of how fragile their own hearts might be. "I'm not here to tell you a dramatic story," he began calmly. "I'm here because sometimes the difference between tragedy and tomorrow is about 30 seconds. A murmur rippled softly. He kept his voice steady, grounded. "If you ever see someone in trouble, don't waste time deciding if they deserve your help. Just help." Lila smiled faintly. "And if you're in a position of power," he continued, glancing briefly toward Victor and Brent, "make sure the systems you build protect people, not your pride." There was no applause at first, just reflection. Then it came, measured, respectful. Afterward, families lined up for screenings. Nurses checked pulses. Doctors reviewed histories. Forms were signed. Elias moved quietly between tables, answering questions, offering reassurance. He wasn't wearing scrubs. He wasn't holding a title, but he was exactly where he needed to be. Brent approached during a lull. "We screened 42 kids already," he said. 2 flagged for follow-up. Elias nodded. "That's 2 families who won't get blindsided." Brent looked around the gym. "I used to think power meant keeping people out." "And now?" Elias asked. "Now, I think it means making sure the right people get in." Victor joined them, sleeves rolled up for once. "We're expanding to 3 more districts next quarter." Lila ran up to her father. "Dad, they gave me a sticker." He crouched slightly. "You earn it?" She grinned. "I didn't faint." He laughed softly. "That helps." Victor watched them, then spoke quietly. You didn't take the advisory title. I don't need a title, Elias replied. You're still advising. That's enough. Outside the gym windows, afternoon sunlight stretched long across the parking lot. Parents chatted. Teenagers scrolled on their phones. Life moved forward. Ordinary. Precious. Elias glanced down at his jacket sleeve, the old leather worn but intact. It hadn't changed, but the meaning attached to it had. It wasn't a symbol of being kept out anymore. It was a reminder of what stands when everything else falls away. As the event wound down, Victor approached one last time. You changed more than one policy, he said quietly. Elias shook his head. You did. Victor smiled faintly. You showed me why. Brent locked the gym doors behind the last family, then walked over. No ropes, he said lightly. No ropes, Elias agreed. Lila slipped her hand into her father's again. Can we get ice cream? She asked. He smiled down at her. Yeah, we can get ice cream. They walked toward the parking lot together, leaving behind folding chairs and screening tables. But not the impact, because this was never about a club, never about a jacket, never even about a black SUV pulling up at the perfect moment. It was about discernment, about what happens when someone refuses to let humiliation define their response, and about how real strength doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself when it's needed most. If this story meant something to you, tell me. What injustice should we tackle next? Subscribe and don't miss our next story. A stranger offered the single dad cash to walk away. He said one sentence that changed everything. Trust me, you'll feel it.